The real enigma troubling Prince Harry, it's all about where his children actually came from. The Sussex kids remain as much a riddle for the public as the Bermuda Triangle's banished vessels. They're like phantom figures, ghostly presences surrounded by intrigue and inconsistencies. People struggle to believe the photos released by the parents, and the stories about these children often seem to raise more questions than they answer. Observers can't help but notice that it isn't just one child evolving over time, but rather a sequence of different children, varying distinctly in age and appearance. Even the Netflix documentary, where the Duke and Duchess of Sussex revealed footage of these children, didn't convince viewers. And when Harry's memoir tried to explain why having children seemed unlikely for him, it only confirmed what many already suspected. Harry insists that it was his brother William who triggered the rivalry. But even if he didn't, if William is indeed fixated on competition, determined to transform our sibling bond into a private Olympic contest, doesn't he already hold an insurmountable advantage? He's married, they're expecting a child, and here I am alone eating takeout over my father's sink. Yes, my dead sink. I'm still living with him. Game over, man, you win. He traced his continued residence with his father back to the period when preparations for William's wedding began. Asterisk asterisk, the frostbite incident asterisk asterisk. Our Arctic team had been warned by experts to avoid sweating since any moisture on the North Pole could freeze instantly, creating severe complications. But somehow, I missed this briefing and spent the first day trudging through the snow, pulling a heavy sled while sweat poured off me. Naturally, my clothing transformed into a rigid sheet of ice, and it didn't take long to notice early signs of frostbite spreading across my fingers and ears. But I kept quiet. How could I voice a complaint amongst such courageous individuals? I had no desire to whine either. Despite the discomfort, all I felt was a deep sense of gratitude, sharing the company of these heroes, contributing to a mission with true purpose, seeing sights few have ever witnessed. On the fourth day, when it came time to leave, I didn't want to go. We hadn't even reached the North Pole. But I had no choice. Either I left now, or I'd miss my brother's wedding. Upon returning home, I was horrified to discover that frostbite had affected my lower regions as well. My ears and cheeks had healed, but my trouser officer had not. I couldn't even bring myself to discuss this matter with my father, but I did share it with millions in my book. I don't know why I couldn't confide about my trouser officer to my father or the other gentlemen present. My trouser officer had become an object of public fascination. The press had covered it extensively. Lost in thoughts of my mother, mortality, and my frostbitten trouser officer, I felt terribly alone. I also wondered if I was on the verge of impotence. After such blunt revelations, any ritualistic theatrics around the conception of his children struck the public as absurd. Technically, it's possible to father a child under these circumstances, but neither a portrait of Diana nor a strand of her hair would be required. If Harry had continued in the same candid vein he'd begun with, explaining his use of IVF or another medical route to conceive, he'd have garnered sympathy and greater trust. But instead, he tied it to shamanistic practices involving his mother's image, leaving readers feeling misled and, in many cases, inclined to discard the book. Asterisk asterisk self-treatment, a path to infertility asterisk asterisk. Harry refrained from consulting a doctor out of fear of a leak. He seemed oblivious to the existence of doctor-patient confidentiality, which even protects the privacy of ordinary people. Medical professionals who read his memoir identified frostbite as an unlikely culprit for his struggles. He'd often engaged in escapades while intoxicated, a detail absent from his memoir. One of his numerous partners may have passed along an infection, and his attempts at self-treatment likely worsened the situation. My trouser officer wavered between hypersensitivity and numbness. The last place I wanted to revisit was Frostbite Land. I tried home remedies, even took advice from a friend. She convinced me to apply Elizabeth Arden cream. My mom used to put it on her lips. You want me to apply it to my trouser officer? Harry, just trust me, it'll help. I opened the tube and the smell took me back to the past. It was as if my mom was there in the room with me. Then I squeezed some out and applied it down there. Strange sensation barely begins to describe it. Journalists began to conclude he was simply descending into self-sabotage. I needed a doctor, desperately, but I couldn't turn to the palace for help. If a staffer learned of my predicament, word would spread and soon enough, my trouser officer would headline the tabloids. After all, palace staff signed confidentiality agreements. Finding a doctor on my own was next to impossible. The risk of exposure was too high. Even in the best of circumstances, this would be difficult, and now it seemed doubly so. Hello, this is Prince Harry. I seem to have an issue down there. Could I possibly come by too? So I asked a friend to locate a highly discreet dermatologist with a specialization in sensitive areas and specific individuals, a tall order indeed. Or perhaps he feared that the Queen herself might find out. Tabloids would run headlines like, "The shameful stories Prince Harry wants to forget." It's unlikely any excuse involving frostbite would fool the press. Harry had long been labeled a wild bachelor who struggled to settle down. Reports painted him as the family's reckless spirit, with the Queen rumored to believe he approached his duties unseriously. In the end, he managed to find a doctor. I showed him my pepper, softened with Elizabeth Arden cream. He saw nothing. I explained that there was nothing visible. It was an invisible catastrophe. Somehow, in my case, superficial frostbite had resulted in extreme sensitivity. The doctor asked how it happened. I explained that I'd been at the North Pole. I flew to the North Pole, and now my South Pole was malfunctioning. The look on his face said it all. Curious indeed. I recounted the symptoms of worsening dysfunction. "It's tough, doctor. Even walking, and cake," I added, was simply not an option. To make matters worse, my trouser officer constantly felt like it was caking. I told the doctor I felt I'd lost my trouser officer entirely. Foolishly, I Googled my symptoms, reading horror stories about partial penectomy, a dark rabbit hole I regretted ever diving into. Based on his description, one might suspect the doctor was clueless, but that's unlikely. What the doctor truly said is something Harry will probably never reveal. According to Harry, the doctor's advice boiled down to the assurance that time would heal it. Does that sound credible? As the doctor predicted, time would indeed heal my trouser officer. But when would the magic of time mend my heart? Eventually, he geared up for his South Pole expedition. They warned me that the South Pole was colder than the North. I laughed. How could that be possible? I'd already frozen my trouser officer mate. What could be worse? Besides, this time I was prepared, better undergarments, extra padding, and so forth. A close friend even hired a seamstress to create a special support pad for my legacy. Square, soft, woven from the finest wool. Then came the wedding with Meghan, her first pregnancy, and the birth of their son Archie. Throughout her term, strange things unfolded, and Meghan opted for a home birth despite her age. The Duke and Duchess moved from Kensington Palace to Frogmore Cottage, where Meghan banned parking near their residence. She eventually agreed to a hospital birth, but chose Portland Hospital in London over the Queen's trusted facilities. The word trouser officer appears 15 times in the memoir. 14 times, Harry discusses his own trouser officer, and once he mentions cutting off a deer's. Harry reveals intimate details to the public that he hadn't even shared with his father. Psychologists believe that the compulsion to reveal personal matters in public can indicate a psychological disorder. Either Harry genuinely grapples with mental health challenges or he's attempting to convince his audience of the same.